Here are some interesting facts and historical contexts about the awakening and selected short stories by Kate Chopin. 1. Published in 1899 during a time of strict gender roles. The Awakening was released during the Victorian era, a time when women were expected to be devoted wives and mothers. The novel's portrayal of a woman seeking independence and personal fulfillment was considered scandalous. 2. The influence of the women's movement. The late 19th century saw the rise of the first wave of feminism, with increasing discussions about women's rights, education, and suffrage. However, the idea of a woman abandoning traditional roles was still radical. 3. New Orleans and Creole culture. The novel is set in Louisiana, reflecting the unique Creole society of the time. Creoles were descendants of French and Spanish settlers, and their culture had distinct customs, including rigid social expectations, especially for women. 4. Rejection by critics and readers. Upon its release, The Awakening was heavily criticized for its immoral themes, particularly Edna's sexual and personal awakening. Many libraries and bookstores refused to carry it, damaging Chopin's literary career. 5. The impact of realism and naturalism. Chopin's work is often associated with literary realism and naturalism, which focus on ordinary people, psychological depth, and sometimes the darker forces shaping human behavior. 6. Kate Chopin was inspired by her own life. Like Edna Pontellier, Chopin was a strong, independent woman who defied societal norms. After her husband's death, she ran a business and became a professional writer, an unusual path for a woman at the time. 7. The novel was rediscovered in the 20th century. After being forgotten for decades, The Awakening was revived in the 1950s and 60s, during the second wave feminist movement, and is now considered a classic of American literature. 8. Themes of existentialism and freedom. The novel explores existentialist ideas before they became widely discussed in literature, particularly the struggle between societal expectations and personal identity. 9. Edna's swimming scene was symbolic and controversial. Edna's ability to swim represents her newfound independence and control over her body, an idea that challenged traditional beliefs about female autonomy. 10. Chopin's short stories were more widely accepted. While The Awakening faced backlash, her short stories, such as Desiree's Baby and The Story of an Hour, were published in magazines and gained popularity for their keen observations on race, gender, and class. 11. Post-Civil War Southern society. The novel and many of Chopin's short stories take place in Louisiana during the post-Reconstruction era. The South was grappling with social and economic changes, but traditional gender roles remained largely unchanged. Women were still expected to prioritize family over personal ambitions. 12. Influence of French literature and culture. Chopin was heavily influenced by French authors like Gustave Flaubert, Madame Bovary, and Guy de Maupassant, who wrote about women's struggles against societal constraints. Like The Awakening, Madame Bovary also explores themes of female dissatisfaction and rebellion. 13. American literary trends of the late 19th century. During this period, American literature was shifting from romanticism to realism and naturalism. Writers like Mark Twain, Henry James, and Edith Wharton depicted characters and settings in a more realistic and psychologically complex manner. 14. Women's fashion and symbolism. In The Awakening, clothing plays a symbolic role. At the beginning, Edna wears elaborate dresses reflecting societal expectations. As she gains independence, her clothing becomes lighter and looser, culminating in her final scene where she sheds her garments entirely before entering the sea. 15. Marriage and divorce laws in the 19th century. Divorce was rare and heavily stigmatized in the 1800s, especially for women. Louisiana law made it nearly impossible for women to initiate divorce unless they could prove extreme circumstances such as abuse or abandonment. This context makes Edna's rejection of marriage and traditional roles even more shocking. 16. The Awakening was almost lost to history. After its initial controversy, The Awakening fell into obscurity. Chopin, discouraged by its reception, never wrote another novel. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that feminist scholars revived interest in her work. 17. Edna Pontellier's name holds symbolic meaning. Pontelier resembles the French word pont, meaning bridge, suggesting Edna's role as a transitional figure between traditional expectations and modern individualism. 18. Chopin's use of Louisiana dialects. Chopin authentically captured the speech patterns of Creole and Cajun characters, including their use of French phrases and idioms. This added realism to her depiction of New Orleans society. 19. The role of motherhood in the novel. The mother woman ideal was glorified in Victorian society. In contrast, Edna is not naturally maternal, which was one of the most scandalous aspects of the book. She loves her children but refuses to sacrifice her identity for them, a stark contrast to characters like Adele Ratignolle, who embodies the self-sacrificing mother figure. 20. Chopin's short stories addressed race and class issues. Some of Chopin's short stories, such as Désirée's Baby and La Belle Zoraide, critique racial inequality in Southern society. Désirée's Baby explores themes of racial identity and prejudice, while La Belle Zoraide tells the tragic story of a mixed-race woman suffering under slavery. 21. The influence of Chopin's own life. After her husband's death, Chopin managed his business and became financially independent, an unusual role for a woman at the time. Her experiences likely influenced her portrayal of strong, unconventional female characters. 22. Music as a symbol of passion and freedom. Mademoiselle Rice's piano playing deeply moves Edna, symbolizing artistic and emotional liberation. Music in the novel represents emotions and desires that Edna cannot express through words. 23. The ending's ambiguity. While many interpret Edna's final swim as a tragic suicide, others argue that it represents ultimate liberation from societal constraints. The open-ended nature of her fate has fueled literary debates for decades.